This is Daniel Trilling, assistant editor of the New Statesman and the author of Bloody Nasty People. A really, really good book. I read the book and I really felt that it was necessary reading. I consider it to be very much a contemporary text and a criticism of our political system and its relationship with multiculturalism and its relationship with its own identity. And so even though perhaps the BNP as a party, or maybe even as a political or as a news item, some people would argue is not as contemporary as it was maybe 12 months or 18 months ago, I think that the themes in the book are very much relevant to where we currently are. And I felt that it was something that I would want to pass on to younger people and pass on to people that I work with. I just wanted to know, why it is that you wrote the book.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, you're absolutely right about where we are with the BNP now. So they were a party that, had a period of success. They kind of started building up in support in the early 2000s, and they peaked around 2008, 2009, when, the sort of electoral peak was when they had 2 members elected to the European Parliament in 2009. But then they collapsed at the 2010 general election. They've seriously diminished since then. But really what I wanted to do was just kind of go over that story again and pick it apart, show what was really going on there, and then set it in this wider context of, the wider political climate, the reasons that were pushing people to vote for the BNP when they were winning votes.
I'm very interested in, how it is you went around the country engaging with communities which, have faced deprivation, have faced a lot of scrutiny, are quite insular, are quite closed. Britain has a very peculiar relationship with racism. There's always a, I'm not racist, but... And so it's a sense where the actual ideology or the ideas that are racist, it's fine to have those, but the actual label of being racist is what is problematic.
I mean, there's always a fair amount of negotiation when you're interviewing people on those kind of grounds where, I don't know, I just found I had to make people at ease. I sort of would try and emphasise the fact that I was researching a book. I wasn't a newspaper reporter out to just catch them out and then print a sort of scandalous quote the next day. And just actually giving people time, just letting them speak. You would get an idea of how they saw the world and their position in it. I mean, this question of racist or not racist is really kind of key to understanding the BNP, I think, and understanding what has been happening with them, because you're right, nobody wants to be known as a racist. Most people can agree that racism exists, but are very reluctant to accept they play any role in contributing to it. And what you've had instead is this idea that racism is the preserve of sort of another kind of outsider, which is the sort of uneducated, thuggish, loutish, skinhead, stereotypical BNP member. When Nick Griffin took over the BNP in 1999, he had a project that he was pitching to the members of that party, who up until that point had been very openly neo-Nazi. Their main activity had been kind of marching around and trying to start fights or holding very Nazi-esque rallies with big sort of flags and banners and armbands and the rest of it, and it wasn't really getting them anywhere. So what Griffin said was, well, if we adopt these new modern techniques of presentation and adopt this new language in which we present our ideas, then we'll start winning elections like maybe the far right in France has been, and other countries in Europe, and stick with me, follow what I say, and you'll have all this great success. Well, a big part of that, strange as it may seem for a party that still was saying it wanted to restore Britain's ethnic makeup to sort of all-white purity, was that it wasn't racist, and what it was saying wasn't racist. It was just saying, it was just saying what reasonable people think, but also it was turning the logic of anti-racism on its head. So all of the messaging became about white people being an endangered minority within their own country, and that they were just standing up for cultural diversity in a way that maybe black community associations were kind of trying to fight for cultural diversity. And maybe you got thoughts on this as well, but I think this is kind of a result of the success of anti-racist campaigning over the last few decades, but also shows you where it reached its limit, in that it kind of established in mainstream discourse the general idea that being racist is like a bad thing, and no one, it's not something we want to be, and it's something we want to stop, but there's perhaps a very limited understanding of what racism is.
For me, the BNP are a product of a British identity that is in crisis, that is being based on a number of things that are no longer where we're at. in terms of empire. I thought that going forward, once Britain has that conversation on redefining who is British and understanding Britain's new place in the world and saying, well, we're going to redefine our identity maybe around, you know, a sense of equality and a sense of a level of inclusion. We're going to make these things a part of our everyday culture. Till these are really a part of Britishness, I think that you're always going to have groups like the BNP and UKIP.
The Macpherson inquiry, which Labour endorsed, actually, it wasn't just a sort of symbolic moment of reckoning. It recommended some actual structural changes to be made to the way that public institutions went about dealing with these issues. And there was a huge backlash against that, led by the Daily Telegraph. And, you know, this had been building for a year or so, and then when this Commission on Multi-Ethnic Britain's report was due to be published, it had a line in it saying, you know, to many people Britishness still is exclusive and means white.
Yes.
And another line saying, well, and what we should do is kind of rethink Britishness so it could include everyone. And the Telegraph picked that up and turned it in, you know, ahead of the report's publication, you know, ran a kind of scandalised look at this ridiculous thing that the government's about to impose on all of us type story. And in the face of that, Straw, who was Home Secretary at the time, just backed down, completely pulled out of supporting this report, saying, no, we're not going to be doing anything like that. You know, it's great to be British, we shouldn't be ashamed of it. And that was the end of it, really.
Yes.
And that was where that conversation stopped.
And that's the problem. When there was an opportunity to actually say, hang on, clearly there's issues with Britain, we have to go forward and we have to show a level of modernity and redefine this Britishness. This is not the Britain of the empire. We need to look at a Britain that is inclusive, that has good relationships with its neighbours, that has good relationships with the neighbours inside its borders, and is a space that is actually inhabitable and equal and is fair. And when that conversation was about to take place, that's when the political support for it vanished.
Yeah, I think it's very revealing of that and of the failures to actually there to be this serious political project behind all of that early talk about anti-racism and multiculturalism. That a year after this Commission on Multi-Ethnic Britain report came out, 2001, you had the riots in the northwest of England.
Yeah.
And now that was a sign, and this is where it's a more profound kind of failure of New Labour, is that it was a sign that, there wasn't integration, and it wasn't just integration on a kind of ethnic or cultural level, but on an economic level as well. All of this is about power structures and who has power, and the ways in which they try and maintain it, I think. And I think that, what gets at the heart of the appeal of the BNP was that it appealed to a group of people who, for various reasons, they're quite often caricatured as the white working class, but when you break down the BNP's vote, it's actually more diverse than that. There's a sort of self-employed tradesmen, it's kind of people with kind of skilled working class jobs, maybe slightly wealthier than others, or at least not wealthier, maybe a bit more comfortable, but who felt for one reason or another they didn't have power and they didn't have a say, and that the BNP was able to kind of pick up on that and then combine it with this residual idea about Britishness that, well, we should, why should we feel like we're the ones losing out when there are these people from cultures and backgrounds that we historically have believed ourselves superior to who seem to be doing better than us. To kind of accept that logic is to accept the logic of racism. It doesn't mean that everybody who bought into those ideas is a kind of foaming at the mouth, violent Nazi swastika-wearing thug.
Yeah.
But unless you acknowledge that racism is there, you can't start to talk about it and start dealing with it.
I think not moralising is a big thing. Yeah. And this might be controversial, but people need to understand that you can be a person of good qualities and still be racist. And I think there's a sense that if you're racist, you are evil, you are scum. And it's almost, as you've mentioned there's been a caricature of what racism is. When we're able to get to that space where we can say, well, I know good racists, people that are good people, but they reproduce racism, that's when you can begin to challenge it. Yeah. So can I just thank Daniel for taking part in our Public Ideas Tour, and then can I make a huge thanks to the Big Green Bookshop in Wood Green. I recommend you to go down there. It's one of the few independent bookshops that even exists in our wonderful city, London. And it's a really, really communal feel. They've got a great collection of books. The people here are really friendly. And, I think what the Public Ideas Tour aims to do is it aims to have really important conversations that really span across Britain, but have them in really intimate and grassroots locations.